Welcome to the clinical cookout. You know you need it, it's kinda scary, but mental health is necessary. Four educated queens taking the lead, hold their hands and they'll help you succeed. Lay your head back, relax, just like that. Now listen to, learn, and your problems will burn away. Cookout, you know, we got just what you need. At the cookout, your heart and mind we will be. At the cookout.
This podcast is for educational purposes only. We are qualified clinicians who will cover various topics on mental health and will sometimes provide community resources. We are not being paid by any organization for our content, and any information we provide is general and pertains to our own personal experiences. We do not provide psychotherapy, diagnoses, or treatment recommendations on air. Any concerns related to your individual mental health should be directed to your medical and mental health professionals. We are not responsible for others' decisions or the subsequent consequences.
Welcome back to the Clinical Cookout, y'all. Today, for the hot sauce, we're going to be talking about them folks that y'all be seeing in the hood, or them folks that y'all be seeing walking down the street that be talking to themselves, and how y'all be calling them crazy. So, I have been around my hometown for a long time, and there are certain people that gets brought up in conversations that a lot of people see walking down the street, or they'll say, oh, they've been around for a long time, and you see so-and-so walking the other day, they was talking to themselves, they was dancing to themselves, and all this type of stuff, and they just label them crazy. And here I am thinking, like, are they crazy, or do they have a mental illness that you don't, haven't labeled correctly? So I was wondering, have y'all ever had that experience with, somebody in y'all's old hometown or in your current hometown who you see weekly or daily walking down the street talking to themselves, like you can tell that they are not in reality?
So yes, but the caveat for me, based off where I grew up, is usually those people were also drug addicts. So it was always attributed to, oh, that's the neighborhood crackhead. Of course he talking to himself or dancing. Like it's not it was always attributed to drugs as opposed to something mentally could be wrong. He been on that stuff. So he been acting like that since he got on that stuff.
And
Think
sometimes
that
we
with
on that stuff to drown out the mental illness part or whatever's going on.
I was just
So
going to ask that.
yeah. But yeah, I seen it growing up a lot too. Especially out in Charlotte. I mean, you just see them, you see people like that all over the place. Um, and I hate the word crazy. My family knows that I hate the word crazy. Like if I hear them call somebody that, and for me, it's within any context. I know we're talking about mental illness, but for me, it's in any context because I think that the history behind that term crazy and what our elders used to use that term to describe, which is people who usually had mental health disorders. Um, hold on, hold on. So the history behind the term crazy is the reason why I can't stand that term. Like I will stop somebody and be like, can we not do that? Can we pick another word to describe them? Like
What's the
different.
history behind crazy?
So what I'm saying is that our elders used to use that term to describe people that were different, people that acted different, right? People that had emotional outbursts that looked like bipolar, people who were walking down the street talking to themselves. So the way that they use that term, the term's crazy and retarded, it's loaded with their perception of someone with a mental illness. So that's why I don't like the term. It's more of the connotation rather than the dictionary definition of it. For me, that's why I don't like it. It's what
Okay,
it's
no, I
been
thought you had
associated with in the
like a
past.
specific history. So you're talking about the way that it was
Historically, in
used.
the 1500s, it literally only meant sickly or diseased. That's the only way they used it. You did not use it in any other context back in the 1600s. So if somebody said it then, that's exactly what they meant. It didn't get that watered down meaning until much later, where you could just use it for somebody, like you hear people say it, boy, stop acting so crazy. Like if their kids acting up or running around, stop acting so crazy, calm down. It didn't get a watered down meaning until much later. So yeah, historically it meant literally something's wrong with you, you're sick, or you have some type of disorder or disease.
Okay. No, yeah, that's what I was trying to find out. What was the history of it, or if it was something else. But you was just saying like the way that is used, it kind of burns your ears. Don't burn my ears as much, because I know that every time an elder says something like that, or every time somebody say that, it's not like a oh my god. It's more so of a like that's just the way that they've always used to describe people, and it's just it's AAVE, and a lot of times it's just vernacular for people. Like they've just grown up using these things, and they're not trying to put a clinical diagnosis on somebody. They don't have the skill set that we have to actually diagnose somebody. That's the way that they make sense of what's happening in their immediate neighborhood or in their immediate life. And so I don't, I mean, I I love the word just for like when I'm like, oh, he over there acting crazy or something like that. Just like growing up in culture, but you know, in a professional setting, which everybody's not in, um, it goes out the window because there's other ways to describe people.
And it too, like when you hear somebody say, when you ask about like, how was the party last night? Oh, girl, it was crazy. You know, in that context that she means, oh, it was lit, it was fun, it was a lot going on. So it doesn't burn my ears like that either. And then two, like my grandmothers, if they said crazy, they didn't always mean it negatively. But if they said somebody was touched, that was different. That's when you knew somebody had something going on. Like, oh, he just touched. That
Forgot
like if
all
we talk
about
about
that term.
AAV, that is worse to be called touched.
I
Is
forgot
it
all about
really?
that term.
My family never used the term touched. It was always
Really?
crazy. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
that's a big
I
one.
know they don't always mean like they don't always mean anything by it when they say crazy. It's just something that they've heard from their parents and their parents. It's just a term that we use. But for me, I'm about like educating people now. Like there are other ways to describe people instead of just saying crazy, especially people that are different from us. Same thing with touch. I've never heard that, but that sounds a little better to me. Crazy. But
Yeah,
it's
because
I want to
because
be
it's the
called
same
but
touched.
thing.
listen, so you know how I'm saying like the connotation and the associations? I've never heard touched before. That doesn't like my family doesn't use it. So when I hear that term, it's like a fresh term in my mind. I've never heard it. But
Yeah,
crazy is loaded because my family has used that term to describe
so much.
so much. So it's like I know y'all aren't saying crazy and touch to like be mean and like throw it at somebody's face, but it's also like, can we find another way to describe it? You know what I mean?
But
Like,
what's interesting, Amber, I think that our elders especially used it because they're not clinicians. It's better that they don't just label somebody with a disorder like, oh, they just bipolar. You don't know that. So to say they just a little crazy, they just a little touch. I don't know what they got, but they got something.
you know what? I like that because we did our episode earlier about misusing clinical terms.
Yep.
So actually, I like looking at it from that perspective. Maybe I won't be so mad at it no more.
Because I don't know how to describe it, so I'm just telling you something's wrong.
Yeah,
Something's
but
So
wrong.
there,
the
Okay,
elders in my family, when you say
that's
stop calling
true.
people crazy, they gonna cuss you out and then call you crazy.
I
Right.
there's another term that I just heard recently, like when they describe a kid's behavior, but I can see it being described for crazy too. But someone used the word colorful. They was like, this person has a colorful background. And it was just describing a behavior that, instead of, saying crazy or bad or something, they said colorful. So I was like, oh, I
That's
didn't
That's
think
because we
about
love
it.
feel good terms. We hate what
yes.
stuff really is. Like we're like,
Now
oh, let's
Keith
say
just reminded me
colorful,
with
and
kids
we all
though.
saying the same dang on thing on low.
Yeah.
We is, but I do think in some contexts now, like before, yes, words matter before, but I also think that words drives behaviors. And sometimes when we hear these negative terms, people then tend to not us, but tend to react a certain way towards somebody once we frame it in a certain way. So let's just say if we do use the term crazy, how do you think people are gonna act around this person? They're gonna be like, oh, scared or have some sort of like already, we've been going over heuristics and judgment and easily snap judgment. They hear a word and boom, now they're treating them a certain type of way.
Well, I also
Yep,
knew a
they
guy
treat you
who
different.
said that as we were growing up, everybody
Mhm.
labeled him crazy. And so he started acting the part. He would be the one like to spray paint something or to call in a bomb threat to the school or to do something off the wall because everybody like had that expectation of him, and he was just like, oh, they call me that, so I'm act the part. And it's I think that's really crazy. And it goes to the point of like let's maybe when we're describing kids and stuff like that, let's use, more colorful language and more try to like direct it towards something else because people will take on the persona that you give them. So I think
Yep.
like when I'm talking adult to adult, if we can't go there, then we can't talk because it's like, and I'm not saying we got to say crazy and retarded and all of that, but trying to make me change everything I'm saying or the way that I'm describing something, and I was born and raised with all these terms and I know the meaning of it, it's for me it gets to be like, okay, but you know that that's not what I'm saying. But you know this and you know that. You know what I mean? So it for me, I think it gets a little bit sticky. Even with trying not to use it. Like I said, in clinical settings, I don't use that or something like that. But if I'm just hee hee hawing with my friends and I'm like, yo, such and such is crazy. Like, don't correct me. Don't do that. So, but that's a me thing.
Yeah, and
He's uncomfortable with it. If somebody's uncomfortable with it like that, I'm gonna try even in lesser situations to not say it. But like finding more colorful language with kids, I like that because Auntie Keisha just made me think of something when we talk about kids. Even use it like I don't like when people say, "Oh, they just special." I hate when people say that. And I know special has a positive meaning,
No,
but
I
back in
got
the
two
day,
different
if you
ones.
call the kids special, they special. They in a special class, or they're slow. Like that is that's worse to me than crazy too, just like touched is. I think it's a matter of how we all grew up. So if you hear certain terms, it triggers you differently than others. Crazy doesn't trigger me like touch does. But Amber never heard touched. So that's like, oh, I like that. Touched is different. And I'm like, well, crazy is over, it's so much so used it don't matter to me.
And I'm like, you said I'm touched. Your mama touched. And now I gotta
I'm
go
gonna
off
touch
on it because
you.
it's
I'm
like,
gonna
what?
look,
touch you.
I'm
Touch.
glad you said it was not a good term because I ain't gonna go around using it now. But I'm not gonna lie, I do slip up every now and then and say crazy, like when I'm talking with friends. And like I said, don't mean anything by it, but I know that that term is emotionally charged for me. But we are going to switch over to our main dish. Today we are going to be talking about schizophrenia. And schizophrenia is one of those mental health disorders where you will hear a lot of people call them crazy or touched or special or some of those other negative terms that you hear to describe people with mental health disorders. So let's go ahead and hop on over and we're going to get started on schizophrenia.
It's kinda scary, but mental health is necessary. For educated queens taking the lead.
All right, y'all. Welcome to our main dish, and we want to introduce y'all to schizophrenia. We talked a little bit about it in the hot sauce, and we know that when we're walking down the street, like we say, we see the people and they're doing different things on the side of the road, or they're dressed a certain way, and they just look a little bit off. But we want to talk about maybe is it looking off, or maybe are they schizophrenic? So let's get into what schizophrenic disorder is. So schizophrenia requires the presence of an active phase that lasts for at least 1 month and includes 2 of 5 characteristic symptoms. One of the symptoms of schizophrenia is delusions, hallucinations, or disorganized speech. So that's just going to be one of the symptoms that are going to be involved when we start to diagnose schizophrenia. The other 2 symptoms are disorganized or catatonic behavior and negative symptoms. Negative symptoms are loss of affect. So some people might just look at you straight up when you're talking to them. They might just be talking just like this. They might not have any facial expressions. They might not have any changes. Um, and this disorder, it's not just something that just happens over. I mean, it could be something that happens overnight, but it's not something that just happens overnight and it's only like for like a month and then the person goes back to being the way that they used to be. This is at least 6 months, okay? Sometimes you get people they're just not themselves all of a sudden, and they might be doing different things that you're like, okay, Earl ain't never been like this before. Earl's never been telling me that he's seen things in the corner. He's never been a person that would just go hang out on the street corners all night, not get any sleep, look at me and have disorganized speech, or just talk different, or just talk what people will call crazy, or as in our elders, talking out of their head. So that's how schizophrenia is actually viewed. Now, there's another part of schizophrenia, and it's on the spectrum, but it's called schizophreniform. So schizophreniform is at least 1 month but less than 6 months. So one of the symptoms is still going to be delusions, hallucinations, or disorganized speech. Another one is schizoaffective disorder. Now, schizoaffective looks different because a lot of people mix this up with bipolar disorder. So, schizoaffective has one symptom of schizophrenia. Recurrent symptoms of schizophrenia. So, schizophrenia and a major depressive or a manic disorder. So, and that's for the duration of the entire illness. But it still has to have the presence of delusions or hallucinations for at least 2 weeks, but without the mood symptoms. So without feeling down, without feeling depressed, or without having the mania. Does that make sense?
Yep,
Y'all
and there
sure?
is
Okay.
because schizoaffective does look like bipolar minus the mania. If you have manic episodes, there is a bipolar type of schizoaffective as well, with the schizophrenia symptoms, the major depression, and the manic episodes.
So I did have one time I seen a person that was schizoaffective, and it was very, very early in my career, so I didn't know like the difference of what he was going through. But we had group therapy, and in the group therapy he would kind of sit there but not really want to be bothered with everybody else. Like, he didn't want friends. He didn't want to connect with anybody. He was just a part of the group. But he would sit and, he would have a flat affect, and which means he was just looking. And even when he would talk, there's no what is it? There's no inflection or anything like that in his voice. He just kind of was just there. And he was just fine being the way he was. And he had a very prominent career. So he wasn't somebody that was just on the streets, dressed different, wielding around knives or anything like that. This was a person that was a career man, but this was the way that he was. And it worked because I think he was a detective or something like that. So with that kind of personality, it fit his job. His job fit his personality very well.
And that brings up a really common misconception when we talk about schizophrenia or any of the schizophrenia spectrum disorders. People are really afraid of them because they feel like if somebody or if I get this diagnosis, I'm never going to be okay. Like, I can never be normal. I can never have a normal life. I can never have a career, a family. Like, they really feel like that's one of those diagnoses that everybody seems to be afraid of when you just gave a description of somebody who who functioned and who had a career.
Well, I have diagnosed schizophrenia only a couple of times, but it's mainly like re-diagnosing it because they've already had the diagnosis from adults, and because I work outpatient. They are more functional, still not fully functioning. So the ones that I have diagnosed, like, they didn't have jobs, their children were taken away from them. They weren't really functioning very well, but they could live on their own. They could take a shower, they could get themselves dressed, they could go out, walk the street or whatnot. And so there are different levels of functioning when it comes to schizophrenia as well. So when it's really severe, that person is likely in a psychiatric facility, inpatient. Like, you're not going to see them walking out on the streets. I mean, let me not say always, because there are some who just don't get treatment or don't have access to treatment, but typically they would be in an inpatient facility. And then there are some people with schizophrenia who are more functional, but they're still not fully functional, right? They can't go through daily life the way that other people do. Medication is helpful as well, but it's still very difficult for them. Like, I've diagnosed someone with paranoid schizophrenia, and that means that they are like, everybody in this world is out to get them. Any person they come in contact with, they think the government is coming to get them, things like that. So it's very difficult for them to function. They can talk to people, they can have conversations, they can go to the grocery store and buy their food, but the whole time they're in the grocery store, they're looking around to see if there's any radios or any speakers or anything like that, if anyone's coming to harm them. So it looks different for different, I guess, different levels of severity, but in general, it is still very difficult for them to function on a daily basis.
Speaking of working with people with diagnosed with schizophrenia, I've worked in crisis units where I've worked with the most severe. And I think that the average population would not know what to do if they came across someone who was very severely dysfunctional. And what I mean by that is, I've known even police officers to go to homes where people have chopped off their hands. I have known people to burn down their apartments because they believe that there is the devil in like a barcode, who have to be like court ordered to be like monitored. I've known people in mid sentence to even just be talking normally and boom, like it was immediately cuss word after cuss word, really fast, and it was like they were talking to someone else in the room. And a lot of people don't understand, like, no, it's a real illness, and there are absolutely different levels to this. Um, and I know that this may be a controversial statement, but I've realized that the United States is moving toward having social workers or mental health professionals go out with police, because even though police are working in the community, that does not mean that they know how to treat mental illness, especially someone who's in a psychotic episode. So typically, when I work with police and have worked with police before, because yes, I know. Yes, I talk about gun violence and police brutality and stuff like that, but it's still in my job. When you work in a crisis unit, it is likely that you're going to work with the police because they're the person that go out and do welfare checks. And so when they go out, I have to be able to warn them saying, hey, this person's having an episode, or this person has a background of mental illness. And just to put them on guard, like, don't go in there guns a-blazing, or don't go in there, with this type of mentality. You need to go in there with this type of mentality. Or one of, like, now they have like crisis mobile units now where they can go out into the community to help these individuals with schizophrenia, or try to help those individuals who have just severe mental illness. But working in that field is not for the faint. It is a very, very serious thing. So yeah, if you want to get in that field, just so you know, you will learn a lot. That's all I'm saying. You will definitely learn a lot about those individuals. But like all the aunties were saying, there are some who are functional and can have successful lives with medication, being treated with therapy. So yes, there is a positive outcome that can happen.
There are some you oh, sorry, Ash, go ahead.
No, you good.
There are some
My,
units here
oh,
that send mental health workers, that are actually being taught by mental health workers, like some of the cops here, because I don't think before, like you said, that people were readily just saying, you know, oh man, they're schizophrenic, calm down. Because when you are trained as a police officer, you're not trained in there to go in there thinking about somebody's mental health right away. You're trained in there to make sure that everyone that is around you go home to their families. So the mental health units and stuff like that are starting to work with police officers a little bit more. And then working with crisis intervention. I know my boss, he does that, like the crisis intervention, he teaches them how to handle that because, they did not know before.
yeah. Yeah, I've seen that. I living in Colorado, I absolutely saw it a lot because the homeless population is so high there. A lot of times in places where it's a really high homeless population, a lot, well, I won't say a lot, but trust me, it's homeless people who have some type of schizophrenic disorder. They're on that spectrum. So getting the cops to work with crisis mental health um, providers and such is a really good idea because, like you said, the cops' job is to make sure everybody is safe. But they don't really realize that this person who is having this paranoia or this delusion, to them, that is real. They are scared. So I would see a lot of homeless people who had a schizophrenia diagnosis who are saying everybody is coming at me or attacking me, there was a man who stripped all of his clothes off because he thought his clothes were snakes. I'm like, that man really believes that. Like, I don't think you understand how scary it is for your mind to tell you that. And so he believes that. So yes, your job as a cop is to make sure everybody is safe, but that includes that person too. They're scared. And I think crisis centers working with police is a really good idea because they just not trained to see it that way.
I think one of
And
the toughest ones I've ever done was like, or not toughest ones, but like the more complex ones is with the religion part of it. Like when those people who are because there's a cultural piece to it too. And so I think those are one of the most complex ones where people are like, "Oh, well, it's just a religion." And it's like, "Yes, but what part of this also filters over into beyond reality?" And so those are the difficult ones I've had to, you know, or it's vice versa. Like, no, they're not crazy. That's just what they believe in, like trying to get people to not label people, just minorities that may come in, or someone that may come in that believe in, or say they heard God's voice or something like that, and people are like, oh well, they must be delusional or hallucinations. And I'm like, no, 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 that's a popular term or a popular saying that we use in our community. So I've seen that also happen as well with the misdiagnosis of schizophrenia,
Yeah.
specifically for Black people, because of our deep ties to religion.
That happens with kids a lot too. It happens with kids a lot because kids don't know how to verbalize some of the symptoms or the things they're experiencing. So I can't even tell you how many times I believe autism and schizophrenia are often mixed up when it comes to kids. So kids have been diagnosed with schizophrenia when it's actually just autism symptoms. And it's like having imaginary friends, talking to someone that's not in the room, different things like that. Or kids will say, yeah, I hear a voice in my head when no one else is around. And I'm like, wait a minute, let's break that down. Is that voice your voice? And is it actually in your head? Or are you hearing a voice outside of you, like a whisper or someone actually talking to you in your ear? Because that's the difference between a hallucination as well. Your conscious versus the actual voices that you're hearing. So yeah, I mean, I see that happens with kids a lot, where people are like, "Oh my God, like you're psychotic," or like you're having hallucinations. When it's like, no, they just hearing their conscious. Like the same voice that tells you don't do that when you're about to do something. That's what they're talking about. They're not talking about an actual hallucination.
I learned that from experience, Amber, because I had a client a long time ago, and she was seeing things, she was talking to things. They can see her on the camera doing all of that, and she was getting a little bit older, so it's kind of like you're getting too old to be kind of having you're getting out of the imaginary friend phase, but there was trauma. So in order to mitigate her trauma, she created an imaginary friend to kind of help her get through things. Now, had I not been up under supervision, she'd been schizophrenic because she was looking real schizophrenic. But over time, and she had very, very like very, very debilitating ADHD too. And so like all of that, like we had to kind of tease out all of that instead of just diagnosing that. And then she stopped looking schizophrenic. And once her ADHD was treated, she was just functioning as a regular child, just a little bit more socially withdrawn and stuff like that. And all of a sudden, her imaginary friend was able to leave and everything. So trauma can cause some of them symptoms, and also depression, because there's a depression with symptoms of psychosis. So people create alternate realities and imaginary friends and things like that to mitigate their symptoms of feeling down, depressed, and their whatever trauma that they're experiencing. And working with kids, you see a lot of that. So I was glad to be up under supervision and for them to catch that.
The idea with kids is so interesting that you brought up, y'all bringing up the kids aspect of it and how kids verbalize things or like explain things. And then Auntie Keish brought that cultural religious element to it, because when I grew up with elders saying children up until a certain age have a sixth sense. They can see things that we can't see. They can feel things that we can't feel. That's a spiritual aspect for me. So it's a very fine line when you're talking about that. When if somebody like me come in and I say my young daughter says she was talking to somebody in the corner and she mentioned somebody that she shouldn't have known. Like that has happened to people that I know. And it's like, we can't just label that, because now we getting into spiritual elements of it. But then on
Yes.
the flip side, the church and religion sometimes takes it too far, where it's like everything is a demon. No, this is schizophrenia. This is not demonic. Everything is not a demon or demonic either. So it's a very fine line when you start mixing those elements in, like spirituality and culture. You have to be versed enough in that to work with people in that realm. Because if I believe children have a sixth sense, just like people believe animals have a sixth sense, then if a 3-year-old tells me that they're talking to somebody, I'm not going to necessarily look at that as schizophrenic or anything negative right away. I'm going to be like, maybe they really are. That's going to be me. But that's because of my background and my culture.
I've had a kid like that she saw dead people. Like, but it wasn't anything outside of that. She was like, yeah. She was like, I've seen them. They visit me. She's like, I don't know why. And then she told, and her mom confirmed it, that she went and told another lady who she'd never known before. And she was like, your son came and visited me. And that lady was like, how do you even know my son? Like, I don't even know you. Like, it was crazy. But that this girl was not schizophrenic, nothing. But if she'd have told somebody randomly that, like, they would probably label her as schizophrenic or label her with some sort of illness. And I wanted to say that, even like now that we're talking about like the inner speech and stuff like that, now there's a trend on TikTok. When people get a hold of stuff, people on TikTok are now saying that they were like, oh, now we have mental illness because we talk to ourselves. They're like, baby, call me crazy then, because I don't talk to myself and have plenty of conversations. I'm like, that's just inner speech. Like, how did y'all get a hold of that? Like, now I'm just saying, like, the way stuff is spreading on the internet about these certain things that you would typically have just developing, like, it's not means you're crazy, or doesn't mean you need to be institutionalized. And like, people just don't know the difference, and they just take something and just run with it. And so I feel like that's really hard when we talk about these psychotic disorders, and people don't understand the difference between them, because there's so much nuance and complexity to it. That's why y'all need to be talking to y'all mental health professionals,
Listen,
for the
Yeah,
audience.
and when
you
we
know,
talk about the voices, it's not just like your
Mm.
inner speech. Like you have a voice or multiple voices
Yeah.
like outside of you that are telling you to do certain things. That's one of the things, because I did evaluate a kid who presented with actual schizophrenia symptoms. Like it wasn't autism, it wasn't ADHD, and I didn't diagnose them at that time. They were very young to diagnose with schizophrenia. But the kid, like the difference is it wasn't like, oh, I'm just talking to myself. It was like, no, there are these people that keep coming up to me whenever I'm in school or whenever I'm, at home and I'm just chilling and like I just want to watch TV and they keep talking to me and I don't know what to do. So I just scream and I just scream and I just start throwing stuff because I want them to stop talking. That is the hallucinations. That's the auditory hallucinations. He's doing whatever he can to stop these people from talking to him and telling him to do certain things. The other thing too is sometimes the voices are nice and sometimes they're not. So they're going to tell you like you need to go cut yourself, or we're not happy right now. We need you to go and like stab the wall or go stab a like they're telling you to do certain things. So there's a big difference between you just talking to yourself and you actually hearing those voices. And they do a lot of things to hush the voices. For kids, it's probably the screaming and throwing things, the outbursts. For adults, a lot of the times they turn to substances. They use drugs to quiet the voices because how else? How else am I going to get them to stop and leave me alone? I need to get outside of this. I need to be outside of my body and experience that.
And people
well,
don't know the difference between impairment. Like, that is, like, that's the point. Like, it's supposed to impair different areas of your life, and people are just thinking that just because something is happening, if it doesn't meet the level of impairment, you don't have a disorder. Typically, a medical clinical diagnosed disorder. Like, that's how we typically go off that. But people think that just because it's happening, that they're immediately crazy or immediately should be hospitalized or whatever. So yeah.
I always flip back to how society and culture makes things either okay or not okay. Like as Amber was talking about that, that inner voice that we have where people talk to themselves, and that's okay. That's your inner voice. But a way, like my uncle used to say, he used to catch me talking to myself. He'd be like, "It's okay, long as you ain't answering yourself back. Is yourself talking back to you? That's different. If you okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah,
No, I'm
talking to
against it.
yourself is okay, but that's for some people. That's an indicator. Like I talk to myself. Well, does yourself answer back? Because now we got a problem." And it's like, no, I'm just having like I'm thinking about things. But then to society, y'all ever seen those like cartoons and shows where you got an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other shoulder? And they
Yeah.
both talking to you. Like that kind of thing could make people think, okay, is this okay, or is this just for like entertainment purposes, or do you really have this is on one shoulder talking to you and this is on another shoulder talking to you? Like we society does things that makes it more confusing for people to kind of understand. And no, it's some differences when we talking about actual clinical diagnosis of these schizophrenic disorders.
I met a guy, and when I was getting my master's, like during one of our practicums, and him and his father owned, and they still own it. I think they're like in Arizona or something like that. But they're the Mexican culture, and their stuff is really nuanced too, because a lot of people in that culture might be Catholic. So once you start getting in the different Christian religions, religion does start to look different or start to look like psychosis. It can look like psychosis sometimes. So in order to be a clinician at their site, you had to undergo 6 hours of like this, like listening to the headphones, and it's of voices in your head. So it's really intense training of the voices saying you're not worthy, you're ugly, you're dirty, kill yourself, hurt yourself. The clinician has to actually go through that training so that they can understand how schizophrenic people feel, so that whenever they're going into that, they're going into it with a different lens. I thought that was really cool. Now I don't know if I want to do that training to be one of their clinicians, because they said that it's really, really intense, and that's a lot. But just in order to do that with them, I was like, wow, that's like that's unique. That's special. And I think it will breed a special kind of clinician to learn how to deal with that.
I would be scared
I
to do
want to
that
do it.
training. I would be scared as hell to do that training because me, I would like as soon as you said that and described the training, I was like, what if me listening to that triggers something for me? I would be a little bit nervous to do that kind of intense training like that.
I want to do it, but
See,
only because I always wonder, like I don't want to live life with these mental health disorders, but I do always wonder, like, what does it feel like for you? Like when I'm in these evaluations, I can never say like I understand.
Nope.
I understand what you're going through. I can't say that because I don't. And I do wonder, like, what does that feel like for you to have this? To me, it's kind of like this pressure just like pushing in on you, and you can't get out of it, you can't stop it, and it just keeps going and going and going until you do something to stop it, until you hurt yourself or use a substance or run or scream or whatever, just to get that away from you. Like I can't imagine what that feels like, but I know it can't feel good.
it would definitely heighten your empathy if you knew what it felt like. So to go through that type of training, it's gonna make you like, okay, this is really what they're dealing with. Like I was training, this is real for them.
Yeah.
At our agency we have like a first episode psychosis, FEP. That's what we have at our agency. That's specifically for people who go through their first episode of psychosis, which is probably scary. And where there's just a certain set of individuals who have a little bit more knowledge and training in first episode psychosis. So even though I've never like that's not my part of my responsibilities and duties at work, I've always been curious about it. Like, what are some other things that, I could learn about psychosis? I know it's a lot of education because I know with people, when we talk about schizophrenia and psychotic disorders, we we often forget about the caregivers and we forget about the people who gotta, work with them and the families that's witnessing that and don't know what to do. So if you are a person who have a family member who is diagnosed with schizophrenia, there are resources out there for you guys. There are people who or professionals out there who specifically work with individuals with schizophrenia. So just be sure to reach out to your local community agencies so you can get the help that you need of how to help and manage I guess, the treatment of your significant other or family member who has schizophrenia.
Another thing, Keisha, I wanted to add to that. So it seems like we're kind of transitioning out. So I did want to add this before we go, is that medication is a really big part of schizophrenia, and also treating the family members, because like you said, family members don't know how to go through it, but you have a bigger chance of a positive outcome if the family is well versed in the illness with them, and if they actually treat them kind of at home how they would be treated in any kind of institution. And I'm not saying, just medicating them whenever they get out of control or anything like that, but understanding their illness and actually working with them through that. So there are shots and stuff like that to where you can get for 1 month, because a lot of times people with schizophrenia, they will feel better and then say, oh, you know what, I don't need this medication anymore. And then when they go too long without their medication, then they go back into psychosis and the hallucinations and the delusions and the catatonic behavior and all the symptoms. And then you got to hurry up and try to find them somewhere to get them the shot real quick. And then the shot takes a while to kick in. And so it could be a cycle of disappointment and reoccurring symptoms. And that's trying on the family member and the person with schizophrenia.
And speaking of the family member, I actually just wanted to add in one interesting tidbit here. Um, there is something called, have y'all ever heard of shared psychotic disorder?
Mm-mm.
Y'all never heard of it before? I actually diagnosed it only one time because it's very, very rare. But this just speaks to the effect that it has being a family member taking care of someone who has schizophrenia or another psychotic disorder. It's shared psychosis, and it's basically you are a well-adjusted person. You don't have any mental health disorders or anything like that. But because you have been around or you're very close to someone who is having a psychotic episode, you kind of share those symptoms. Like you begin to kind of feed into the hallucinations and feed into the delusions to the point where you actually start to believe those things as well. And then that can significantly impair your functioning. The only difference is that schizophrenia is a lifelong diagnosis. Shared psychotic disorder could be just very short term, just in like while you're taking care of this person, while you're super close to them and having to deal with all of this. But you're able to kind of come out of that psychosis at some point. But it is a shared, there's a lot of research behind it. It actually started in another country, like they figured it out there, and then it came to the US. Not it came here, but we started to learn more about it and do more research about it. But that's a thing too. And I've actually diagnosed it before. It's very odd, it's very different to see that, but it really does impact family members in that way.
Wow.
I can see it. I can see it. Just like somebody's emotions could affect your emotions. Like that, I can see it. That's wow. Oh, I do want to point out, Amber, because you said schizophrenia is lifelong. Um, just for schizophreniform, that's usually signs of early schizophrenia. However, 1/3 of cases of schizophreniform, the symptoms just go away, and the person has that experience, and then they fine. But that's only in 1/3 of cases. Usually, if you get diagnosed with schizophreniform, that is saying you are in the onset or early stages of schizophrenia, which is lifelong.
Did I say schizophreniform?
No, you said schizophrenia. I was just giving
Oh,
another just little piece because you
oh
said it,
shoot.
it
I was
popped
about
in
to
my
say,
mind.
damn, I gotta go back and say that again.
No, you said it right. It just popped when you said it, that clicked for me that schizophreniform is the only one that you have a possibility of it just being that experience, and then you could be okay.
Another thing before we I know we wrapping up, when I talked about the getting caregiver, getting help with the caregiver, also go back in your family history and look at if there were other people in the family who may have had schizophrenia or some sort of mental illness, because it is likely that if one person has schizophrenia, there may be another person that will have schizophrenia in the family. So just be sure to do a whole family history check when you are learning more about schizophrenia.
And speaking of that, I know we're wrapping up, but there's actually like some interesting let's see if I can pull it back up. Hold on one second. In the DSM, so because you're talking about like the genetics, but there are also environmental factors that can contribute to schizophrenia as well. And one of them that I didn't know about, it says that the season of birth has been linked to the incidence of schizophrenia. So like late winter, early spring in some locations, and summer in some locations, like when you are born in some areas can be linked to that. That's not saying it causes it, but it can be linked to or associated with that diagnosis. And then other things, y'all know how we've mentioned a couple of times that we tend to see it in the homeless community quite a bit. It does say that socially oppressed groups facing discrimination are more at risk of developing schizophrenia as well. And it even goes on to say that this could be related to factors: high levels of discrimination, less social support, more stigmatization, higher social isolation. So even some socially oppressed groups, which Black people are a socially oppressed group as well. That puts you more at risk of developing it as well. I just thought that was interesting to put in. I know we're wrapping up. I'm sorry. Go ahead and wrap this up.
I just wanted to pinpoint because we talked about kids. Typically, now schizophrenia can be diagnosed at any age, but typically it is not diagnosed before age 12 or the onset doesn't happen before that. And in reality, it's usually teens, early 20s for men and late 20s, early 30s for women. But that range of diagnosis, ages 12 to 40, that's kind of where the onset occurs. So yes, kids can exhibit and have it, but typically the onset doesn't occur until a little bit later.
And the reason why it's not so readily diagnosed in kids is because Auntie Suge always say, what else could it be? There
Mm-hmm.
could be so many other things. One
Yeah.
thing is that families pass down brain types, right? We pass down genetics and stuff like that. So some people don't believe that, like, if you have schizophrenia, then maybe your child will have it and stuff like that. But me and Keish, we've been studying a lot, right? And we found out that in monozygotic, which is identical twins, 48% chance that if one twin has it, then the other twin will have it. If you have two parents with schizophrenia, it's a 46% chance. So there are some high chances and some high rates that you can get it, and that it is genetic. But as we wrap up, I think we encourage you guys to just whenever you do see people out on the streets and they're looking a little different, think of what else could it be? Are they just crazy? Do they have a diagnosis? How much grace can you extend when you find out that somebody have a diagnosis? Um, what's inside of you that is able to look at somebody different and say, okay, well, that may be schizophrenia or maybe bipolar, or how did they get there? Or it could be drug induced, because drugs can sometimes induce hallucinations and psychosis, and it can also make you look schizophrenic. But just, I guess, look inside yourselves and see what else could it be. How can I help if I want to help? What can I do? Is there anything I can do? So, I mean, we looking inside of ourselves. We just want to know what y'all about to do.